After rebirth, the spicy hotpot I ordered was more delicious than his life. The phone on the bedside table emitted a sharp, life-hurrying buzz. I struggled to open my eyes. The familiar crystal chandelier on the ceiling stung my eyes painfully. A wave of nausea churned in my stomach, mixed with the bitterness of long-term medication. This was Vincent's villa, our marital home. Shouldn't I be in the hospital morgue? Just a moment ago, I had flatlined due to excessive blood loss. My soul floated in midair, watching as the doctor shook his head at me and covered me with a white sheet. Meanwhile, the emergency room next door was brightly lit, with a nurse excitedly shouting, "Miss Vivian has been saved. The blood type matches, and there's enough blood." I died, using my last vestige of worth to revive my husband's beloved white moonlight. How ironic. The phone on the bedside table continued to ring obstinately, the name flashing on the screen, Aunt. She was our housekeeper. With trembling hands, I reached for the phone. The time displayed was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This specific time, this call. Memory surged like a tidal wave, instantly overwhelming me. It was this call. In my past life, it was Aunt who called tearfully, saying Vincent had suffered a severe car accident while protecting Vivian, and both had been taken to the hospital in critical condition. Vivian had the rare Rh-negative blood type and needed a massive transfusion. Coincidentally, so did I. So, dragging my emaciated body, ravaged by severe depression and anorexia, I rushed to the hospital like a madwoman. I knelt before the doctor and begged him to draw my blood, as much as possible, just to save Vivian's life. Because Vincent had said that if Vivian died, he would make me accompany her in death. At the time, I loved him so much, yet I was so afraid of him. I lay on the cold blood-drawing bed, watching my crimson blood slowly flow into the body of the woman I hated the most. In the end, she lived, and I died. As for Vincent, the man I loved with every fiber of my being, he didn't even spare me a glance. He stayed by Vivian's bedside, holding her hand, never leaving her side. Ridiculous. Utterly, laughably ridiculous. I looked at the still buzzing phone, a weak yet icy smile curling at my lips. Starting over felt so good. I didn't answer. Instead, I directly pressed the red end call button. The world instantly fell silent. A familiar spasm wriggled in my stomach, the telltale signal of hunger mingled with illness. In my previous life, I hadn't experienced the sensation of hunger for a long time. My anorexia made me want to vomit at the mere sight of food. But now, a fierce, unprecedented craving for food surged from the pit of my stomach. I wanted to eat. I wanted something hot, something spicy, something that could sear and sting both my mouth and stomach, anything to prove I was still alive. Summoning all my strength, I sat up in bed, grabbed my phone, and deftly opened a food delivery app. Among the dazzling array of options, I found my target. Ma La Tang, numbing spicy hot pot. I chose the most expensive restaurant, adding double portions of tripe, spam, imitation crab sticks, cheese rice cakes, all the things Vincent had forbidden me from eating in my past life under the pretext of being unhealthy. For the spice level, I selected extra numbing, extra spicy. The moment the payment went through, I felt as though I had completed a grand act of vengeance. The sky outside the window gradually darkened. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat quietly in the darkness, waiting for my dinner. My phone rang a few more times, first from Aunt, then from my mother-in-law, and finally, from an unfamiliar number. I guessed it was probably the hospital calling. I didn't answer a single call, rejecting them all. They must be frantic. That delicate, fragile Vivian, the one Vincent cradled in his hands, was lying on the operating table, waiting for my blood to save her life. Too bad, this time I've no intention of playing the saint. All I want is to enjoy a good meal in peace. About 40 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Dragging my shaky legs to the door, I took the heavy food container from the delivery guy. Your order. Enjoy your meal. Thanks. I closed the door and opened the container. An assertive aroma, a fiery mix of chili and Sichuan peppercorns, instantly flooded the cold, empty living room. I picked up my chopsticks, grabbed a slice of tripe coated in crimson chili oil, and placed it in my mouth. Numbing, spicy, savory, piping hot. The long-missing, intense burst of flavor brought instant tears to my eyes. So delicious. So this is how food is supposed to taste. I was eating ravenously like a wild beast that had been starving for a long time. The scalding hot food slid down my esophagus and into my hollow stomach, bringing a comforting yet stinging warmth. So good. It's so good to be alive. My phone vibrated on the table again. I glanced at it. It was Vincent's assistant. It seemed they really couldn't find me. I couldn't be bothered and continued eating my spicy hot pot. Halfway through my meal, the villa's door was roughly unlocked with a key. My impeccably made-up mother-in-law, Cynthia, stormed in, her face contorted with rage and anxiety, followed closely by the flustered aunt. "Nien. So you are here. Why aren't you answering the phone? Do you even know Vincent is in trouble?" Cynthia immediately bombarded me with accusations the moment she saw me. When her gaze fell upon the spicy hot pot in front of me, the anger on her face instantly transformed into utter shock and disbelief. How can you still have the heart to eat here?" she screamed. "Miss Vivian is waiting for your blood at the hospital to save her life. You heartless woman." I took my time to wipe the oil from the corner of my mouth with a napkin. Then, I raised my head, looked at her face twisted with anger, and smiled faintly. "Oh," I said, "but I'm hungry." My calmness, along with the bowl of steaming spicy hot pot in front of me, stood in stark contrast to her hysteria. Cynthia had probably never seen me like this before. In my past life, in front of her, I was always that meek, servile daughter-in-law. You're insane." She pointed at me, her fingers trembling uncontrollably. "That's right." I nodded, picking up another slice of luncheon meat, blowing on it lightly before putting it into my mouth with satisfaction, narrowing my eyes in pleasure. "This luncheon meat is more delicious than his life." The police arrived at my door, and I became a widow worth billions. My words landed like a resounding slap across Cynthia's face. She probably never imagined that her daughter-in-law, whom she had always regarded as little more than an appendage to their family, someone who wouldn't even dare breathe too loudly, would dare utter such rebellious words. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Cynthia trembled with rage, pointing an accusing finger at me. "Nien, I command you, go to the hospital right now, this instant. If Vivian so much as suffers a scratch, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Command? That word, I had heard it countless times in my past life. Vincent commanded me to abandon my career and become a stay-at-home wife. Cynthia commanded me to wake up at 6 every morning to prepare breakfast with reverent obedience. Back then, I had mistaken these orders for love and duty. Now, I see them for what they really were, nothing more than a master training a slave. I set down my chopsticks and picked up the glass of warm water beside me, taking a sip to soothe my throat, still tingling from the spice. First, I raised my eyes and calmly stared at her. "You're not my mother, so you have no right to order me around. Second, I married Vincent, I didn't sell myself to your family. I have my own freedom. Third, what does Vivian's life or death have to do with me? Am I her walking blood bank?" With every word I spoke, Cynthia's face grew paler. By the time I finished, she was trembling with rage, unable to utter a single word. You poisonous viper," she finally spat through gritted teeth after a long pause. "Say whatever you want." I shrugged indifferently and picked up my chopsticks again. "If you keep making a scene here, my spicy hot pot is going to get cold." My attitude completely infuriated her. Like a crazed lioness, she lunged forward to overturn the table in front of me. But I was faster than her. I directly picked up that half-eaten bowl of spicy soup, stood up, and took 2 steps back. "If you dare to move a single inch, I'll pour this entire bowl of soup all over your wrinkled old face," I said coldly, staring at her with a fierceness even I didn't recognize in my eyes. Accustomed to a life of privilege, Cynthia had never encountered such a situation. Frozen by the intensity of my gaze, her outstretched hand hung awkwardly midair. Just then, her phone rang. Seizing it like a lifeline, she hastily answered. It seemed to be Vincent's assistant on the other end, saying something. Cynthia's face instantly turned as pale as a sheet. "What did you say?" she screamed, her voice breaking. "The rescue was unsuccessful?" Her phone slipped from her hand, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. Her entire body went limp, and she would have collapsed if not for Aunt holding her up from behind. "Vincent, my Vincent," she murmured, her eyes empty as if her soul had been drained. I looked at her, feeling not the slightest ripple in my heart, not even a shred of vengeful pleasure. It was like looking at a stranger. It turned out that when the news of Vincent's death reached me, the man who had tormented me for so long in my previous life, my heart was surprisingly calm. Perhaps, when my heart had withered away in that hopeless marriage, Vincent had already been a dead man to me. I carried my spicy hot pot, sidestepped the dazed her, and walked over to the living room sofa to continue eating. It was a bit cold now, but the flavor was still excellent. I'm not sure how much time had passed when the villa's doorbell rang. Aunt, utterly disoriented, went to answer it. Standing at the entrance were two uniformed police officers. "Excuse me, is this Ms. Nguyen's residence?" asked the older of the two officers, his expression grave. I set down my bowl and walked over. "That's me." The officers' gazes lingered on me for a moment before one of them handed me a document. "Ms. Nguyen, we're from the Municipal Traffic Police Department. We regret to inform you that at 3:15 this afternoon, a severe car accident occurred on Riverside Highway. Your husband, Mr. Vincent, and another passenger in the vehicle, Ms. Vivian, were pronounced dead after failed rescue efforts. This is the death confirmation form. Please sign here." His words were delivered in a formulaic manner, yet each syllable felt like a nail hammering shut my past life. I took the document and pen, my hand steady, not a single tremble. In the next of kin section, I signed my name. Nguyen. As the ink dried, I felt an invisible, burdensome shackle shatter with a resounding clatter. I was free. The police officer took back the documents and added, additionally, "Our preliminary investigation indicates that the accident was caused by Mr. Vincent significantly exceeding the speed limit and failing to use a seatbelt as required. The final determination of liability will require further investigation. We'll contact you again regarding the follow-up procedures." "Understood, thank you for your efforts," I nodded. After the police left, the living room was plunged into dead silence. Cynthia seemed to only now react to the immense blow. She suddenly raised her head, her bloodshot eyes fixed on me with a piercing glare. "It's you. It's all your fault," she shrieked like a mad woman, lunging at me, her nails clawing toward my face. "You jinx. You doomed my son. Why didn't you donate blood for him? Why didn't you save Vivian? If Vivian had lived, Vincent wouldn't have died." Her logic was as absurd and laughable as ever. I sidestepped her attack and watched coldly as she lost her balance and fell onto the carpet. "First, it was your son who was driving, and it was also your son who was speeding. He was courting death himself, it has nothing to do with me. Second, doctors only ask family members to donate blood. Since when is Vivian your family? Third, I crouched down, leaning close to her ear, and spoke in a voice only the two of us could hear, enunciating each word clearly, "You got it wrong. Even if I donated blood, I could only save Vivian. Your son was beyond saving, he died on the spot due to intracranial bleeding. In my past life, I only learned about these details after my death, listening to the nurses' gossip. Vincent had been beyond saving from the start. They wanted me to save Vivian merely to give his beloved woman a sliver of hope." Cynthia's pupils constricted violently. She probably never expected me to know everything so clearly. You. What about me?" I stood up, looking down at her. "I just don't want to be a fool anymore." With that, I ignored her and walked straight upstairs. I needed a good, hot bath to wash away all the humiliation, pain, and dust from my past life. From today onward, I was no longer someone's wife or someone's daughter-in-law. I was just Nyen. A newly wealthy widow who had just inherited billions. Free. My mother-in-law told me to get out, so I showed her the power of the will. After taking a shower, I felt completely revived. The hot water washed over my long sickly body, as if cleansing the weariness deep in my soul. Staring at the pale, gaunt face with heavy dark circles under the eyes in the mirror, it seemed almost unfamiliar. This face, only 26 years old, already resembled a flower on the verge of withering. It's fine, I told myself. From today onward, I would take good care of it. I'd use the most expensive skincare, eat the healthiest food, and get the most peaceful sleep. I would nurture it until it became even more radiant and captivating than Vivian's face. I changed into clean pajamas and stepped out of the bathroom. As soon as I opened the bedroom door, I saw Cynthia and her youngest son, my brother-in-law, Kyle, blocking the doorway. Kyle was the same age as me, a lazy, spoiled heir who relied on Vincent's indulgence to indulge in drinking, gambling, and all manner of debauchery. Now, he glared at me, his eyes filled with undisguised resentment and greed. Nyen. You bitch. Give my brother back his life. As soon as Kyle saw me, he lunged at me like a rabid dog. I was prepared and immediately retreated into the room, slamming the door shut. Kyle wedged his foot in the door gap with terrifying strength. Why are you hiding? Did you do something wrong and now you're scared? He gritted his teeth and forced his way in. Cynthia followed closely behind, emboldened by her son's presence. Nyen, this family doesn't welcome you. You caused my son's death, and you still have the nerve to stay here? Get your things and get out now. Get out? I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, glaring coldly at the mother and son duo. Cynthia, did you forget whose name is on the deed of this villa? This villa was Vincent's wedding gift to me. The property deed clearly bears my name alone, Nyen. It's the only thing I truly owned from that wretched marriage. Cynthia's face stiffened. Kyle, however, roared heedlessly, so what if it's written in your name? My brother bought this with his own money. Now that he's dead, all his belongings belong to our family. You're just an outsider, what right do you have to keep them? Outsiders? I laughed. Kyle, did you even graduate from high school? Do you know anything about the marriage law? I, Nyen, am Vincent's only legally recognized wife. When he died, I became his first legal heir. You people are the ones who are truly outsiders with no claim. Bullshit. Kyle, stung by my words, grew furious and defensive. My brother was so wealthy, how could he not have left a will? He must have left everything to us. Oh, really? I slowly walked to the bedside table, took out my phone from the drawer, and opened an encrypted file. It was an electronic copy of a lawyer's letter. In my previous life, after my death, my lawyer friend had risked defending the Grosvenor Group to send it out and speak up for me. That's why I remembered every single word. Unfortunately, your brother did leave a will, I said, turning the phone screen toward them. 3 months ago, witnessed by the top lawyer Dylan. The will clearly states that all of Vincent's personal assets, including but not limited to company shares, real estate, cash, and securities, are to be inherited entirely by me, Nyen, upon his death. I paused, watching their faces turn deathly pale in an instant, then delivered the most fatal blow. Oh, and by the way, the will explicitly states that his parents and younger brother are not entitled to inherit any portion. At this point, even Kyle was dumbfounded. And no. That's impossible. Cynthia shrieked, Vincent would never do this to us. This must be fake. You forged it. Forged? I retrieved my phone. This will is scheduled to be read by Attorney Dylan tomorrow at 9 a.m. at the Grosvenor Group shareholders meeting. If you don't believe me, you're welcome to attend and hear it yourselves. Why would Vincent draft such a will? The reason is simple. 3 months ago, Vivian returned to the country. Vincent, desperate to reunite with her, pressured me for a divorce. He likely feared I wouldn't agree and thought threatening me with losing everything would force my hand. He assumed that once I left empty-handed, he could amend the will at any time. But what he never anticipated was his own death, before the will could take effect. Truly, divine justice. Cynthia and Kyle clearly reached the same conclusion. Their expressions transitioned from shock to rage, then settled into the ashen pallor of despair. Overnight, billions in assets became mine, while they left with nothing. Nyen, you can't do this. Cynthia made an about-face and attitude. She lunged to grab my hand, but I recoiled in disgust. We're family. With Vincent gone, you're our only lifeline now. She began playing the sentimental card, squeezing out a few crocodile tears. For Vincent's sake, you can't just throw us out. Family? I looked at her, feeling nothing but sarcasm. When you treated me like a dog, did you ever think of us as family? When you turned a blind eye to your son keeping a mistress outside, did you ever think of us as family? Now that your son is dead, you suddenly remember I'm family? My words hit where it hurt. Cynthia's face turned red, then pale. And you, I turned to Kyle. Driving your brother's sports car, dating third-rate celebrities, swiping your brother's credit card, splurging millions every month, did you ever think the money you wasted was what I, your sister-in-law, scrimped and saved from my own needs? Kyle flushed crimson with embarrassment, but defiantly retorted, my brother was happy to spend it on me. None of your damn business. Well, now he's dead. And I'm telling you, it is my damn business, I said as I walked up to them, opened the bedroom door, and gestured for them to leave. This villa is now mine. I'm giving you 1 hour to pack your things and get the hell out of my house. My voice was quiet, but it carried a tone of unwavering finality. Nyen. How dare you? Cynthia screamed again. Watch me, I retorted, pulling out my phone and pretending to dial. Or should I just call security to have you both thrown out like trash? Kyle, being young and thin-skinned, couldn't take the embarrassment and tugged at Cynthia's sleeve. Cynthia glared at me, her hatred so intense it felt almost tangible. She knew I meant every word. Finally, through gritted teeth, she spat out, fine, fine. Nyen, you're ruthless. We'll see about this. With that, she shot me one last venomous look and stormed out with Kyle, slamming the door behind them. At last, the world fell silent. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling utterly drained. I had won the first battle. But I knew this was only the beginning. A war over inheritance, reputation, and survival had just begun, and I had to steel myself for what lay ahead. At the funeral of that scumbag, the family members of his white moonlight came demanding my life. Early the next morning, I contacted lawyer Dylan. When the call connected, a cold yet magnetic male voice answered, "Who is this?" "Dylan, it's Nyen." "Nyen." Dylan's voice showed no trace of surprise, as if he had been expecting my call all along. "My condolences," he said. The words were uttered mechanically, devoid of any emotion. Dylan, the top commercial lawyer in City A, is renowned for his calmness, efficiency, and mercilessness. Rumor has it that he has never lost a case. When Vincent first hired him to draft the will, it was precisely his professionalism and confidentiality that stood out. "Dylan, I'd like to entrust you with handling the inheritance matters of Vincent's estate in its entirety," I said without preamble. "My fees are hourly, 100,000 per hour, he replied. "No problem," I said. Right now, the one thing I wasn't short of was money. "Good." Dylan seemed satisfied with my straightforward attitude. "At 9 o'clock this morning, I will attend the board meeting of Grosvenor Group on time to read the will. After that, I will have my team begin liquidating all assets under Mr. Vincent's name. It is estimated to take about 2 weeks initially. Thank you for your hard work." "Just doing my job." He paused, then added, "Nyen, let me remind you. From today onward, what you'll be facing may not just be legal issues. Be mentally prepared." "I understand." After hanging up the phone, I looked out at the bright sunshine outside the window and took a deep breath. Dylan was right. The Cynthia and her son were just the appetizer, the real feast was yet to come. Vincent's funeral was scheduled for 3 days later. During those 3 days, I locked myself in the villa and didn't go anywhere. I hired a nutritionist and a family doctor to systematically restore my depleted body. The food I once feared like a scourge became delicious and tempting under the careful arrangement of the nutritionist. My weight slowly increased at a rate of 0.5 kilograms per day. My phone was bombarded with calls, from his relatives, company executives, and so-called friends. I ignored them all, blocking every single one. On the day of the funeral, I chose a simple black dress and wore light makeup. The woman in the mirror, though still thin, no longer had empty, numb eyes. Instead, there was a hint of cool determination in her gaze. I appeared at the funeral as the widow. The entire funeral hall was filled with a heavy and eerie atmosphere. His relatives looked at me with complicated expressions, some scornful, some envious, some gloating. The company executives, all shrewd people, wore expressions of grief, but their eyes were calculating something. Cynthia and Kyle knelt in mourning clothes before the coffin. The moment Cynthia saw me, her eyes turned red as if she wanted to tear me apart, but Kyle held her back tightly. I knew they weren't afraid of me but rather the lawyer Dylan standing behind me. I ignored everyone and walked straight to Vincent's black and white portrait. In the photo, he wore a crisp suit, looking handsome and refined, with the faintest hint of a smile at the corners of his lips. This was the man who gave me the sweetest illusions of love and also the cruelest hell. I gazed at him, my heart calm. There was no love left, nor hatred. I picked up 3 incense sticks, lit them, and bowed 3 times before his portrait. First bow, honoring our time as husband and wife, now that fate has run its course. Second bow, thanking you for your heartlessness, which made me see the light. Third bow, wishing you and your beloved a smooth journey on the road to the underworld. After bowing, I placed the incense into the burner. Just as I turned around, a commotion suddenly erupted at the entrance of the mourning hall. A seemingly refined and dignified middle-aged couple, surrounded by a crowd of reporters, rushed in crying. "Vincent! Give my daughter's life back," the middle-aged woman wailed as she threw herself onto Vincent's coffin, her cries heart-wrenching. I recognized them. They were Vivian's parents. In my past life, they had caused a scene just like this at Vincent's funeral, portraying themselves as grieving parents who had lost their beloved daughter, winning everyone's sympathy. Then, under the guise of compensation for emotional distress, they took a hefty sum of money from the Grosvenor Group. This time around, they were back. After Vivian's mother had cried her fill, she suddenly raised her head and turned her accusations toward me. "And you? Nien." She pointed at me, venom flashing in her eyes. "If you hadn't refused to help, my Vivian wouldn't have died. You murderer." The reporters behind her immediately turned their cameras and microphones toward me, the camera flashes making my eyes hurt. "Mrs. Vivian, please calm down," the bodyguard beside me quickly stepped forward to stop her. "I can't calm down." Mrs. Vivian looked hysterical. "My daughter died because of her. She has the same rare blood type but just stood by and watched my daughter bleed to death. This is premeditated murder. Murderer. Give my daughter back." Mr. Vivian also started screaming along with her. Their relatives began whispering among themselves. The reporters, meanwhile, like sharks smelling blood, excitedly documented everything. Seeing this, Cynthia immediately perked up. She rushed over and joined forces with Vivian's parents. "That's right. It's her. This poisonous woman killed Vincent and Vivian. She's the murderer." 3 people, each echoing the other, instantly thrust me into the eye of the storm. Labels like heartless wealthy woman who refused to save a life, a jinx who caused her husband's death, a schemer who took 2 lives to seize a fortune, these nearly branded themselves onto my forehead. Watching this farce unfold before me, taking in those ugly expressions, I felt strangely calm inside. Slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Then, I connected it to the massive LED screen in the memorial hall. The screen, which had been cycling through photos of Vincent from his lifetime, abruptly shifted to something else. A high-definition surveillance video, complete with a timestamp, appeared on the screen. The location in the footage was the entrance of this very villa. In the video, Vincent held Vivian's hand and pulled her into the passenger seat. The two kissed passionately in the car for a full 5 minutes. Then, Vincent started the engine. Vivian giggled and said to Vincent, "Vincent, drive faster, I can't wait." Vincent smiled, playfully pinched her nose, and said, "All right, my little temptress, hold on tight." With that, he stepped on the gas, and the multi-million-dollar sports car shot forward like an arrow. The video froze on the license plate number and the crystal-clear timestamp in the lower right corner of the screen, precisely 10 minutes before their fatal accident. The funeral hall was eerily silent. Everyone stared dumbfounded at the glaring scene on the screen. I retrieved my phone and walked up to Vivian's parents, speaking softly but loud enough for all to hear. "See it clearly now?" I said. "First, your daughter willingly got into my husband's car and urged him to speed. Second, where they were going and what they planned to do, I think every adult understands." Turning to the reporters, I wore a perfectly measured, sorrowful smile. "I am heartbroken that my husband and his lover died together in such a tragic manner. But what pains me even more is that, as his wife, I was the last to know about his affair." My words landed like a bombshell. What refusal to save lives? What premeditated murder? So it turns out this was a real-life soap opera, a scumbag and his mistress going on a joyride only to both meet their demise. And me, Nyen, was actually the most innocent, most pitiful victim. Cyberbullying me for not helping someone in danger? Then let the whole internet see his affair video. The court of public opinion instantly reversed its verdict. If before, I was the heartless ex-wife who stood by and did nothing, then now, I've become the most pitiable perfect victim, the one kept in the dark, whose husband cheated and then died unexpectedly. The reporters, as if injected with adrenaline, turned all their cameras toward the pale-faced parents of Vivian and Cynthia. "Mr. Vivian, Mrs. Vivian, do you know that your daughter is the other woman who interfered in someone else's marriage? Cynthia, you just accused your daughter-in-law. May I ask if you were aware of your son's affair? Is the video authentic? Do you have anything else to say?" The three of them were surrounded by reporters, their faces betraying uncontainable panic and disarray. They probably never dreamed in their wildest nightmares that I would possess such damning evidence. This evidence was, of course, not captured by me. In my past life, after I died, my best friend Quinn hacked into the villa's security system to find it in order to seek justice for me. By then, I was already dead, and aside from drawing a few sighs from netizens, the evidence had no further use. But now, it has become the sharpest sword in my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," I spoke up at just the right moment, my voice trembling with just the right amount of emotion, my eyes slightly reddened. "Family shame should not be aired in public. Today is my husband's funeral, and I hope he can be laid to rest peacefully. As for the rest, I will leave it to my lawyers." My words struck the perfect balance, gracious, dignified, and laced with the fragility of a victim. Sure enough, the journalists present all looked at me with sympathy. Dylan had, at some point, positioned himself by my side. His team efficiently held the reporters at bay, clearing a path for me. "Well done," he whispered to me. "Knowing how to wield public opinion is the first step in modern warfare." I glanced at him but said nothing. This farce finally ended with Vivian's parents and Cynthia fleeing in panic. After the funeral, the two hashtags #Grosvenor Group CEO and mistress die in car crash and #wronged wife releases cheating footage on the spot quickly topped Weibo's trending list, each marked with a deep red explosive symbol. The comments from netizens overwhelmingly supported me. "OMG. The most satisfying revenge of the year. The wronged wife is a legend. That cheating pair got what they deserved. Justice served. My heart aches for the wronged wife, so beautiful yet betrayed. Wasn't Vivian marketing herself as the pure and innocent Jade girl? Disgusting, turns out she was a knowing homewrecker." Am I the only one who noticed how calm and composed the wife was throughout? Total queen energy. Love her. Reading these comments, I felt nothing. In my past life, I had been on the receiving end of cyberbullying too. The same people who had hurled venomous insults and curses at me were now using their keyboards to sympathize with and praise me. Public opinion truly is the cheapest and most fickle thing in the world. But there's no denying how useful it can be. I called Dylan. Dylan, what's the next step? Lawsuits. His voice remained as calm as ever. Sue Vivian's parents for defamation. Sue Kyle for property encroachment. As for Mrs. Cynthia, I recommend petitioning the court directly for support relationship termination. What do you mean? It means you can choose to keep supporting her like a goddess, treating her like royalty. Or, you can choose to pay only the legally required minimum alimony each month, turning her from a pampered noblewoman into an ordinary old lady who has to worry about daily necessities. Dylan's words were understated yet utterly ruthless. I could almost picture the expression on Cynthia's face upon hearing this news. Just do as you say, I replied. I have only one request, speed is of the essence. My team never operates inefficiently. After hanging up, I received a WeChat message from my best friend, Quinn. Nyan. You're trending. Well done. I never liked that family anyway. Quinn was my college roommate and is now a surgeon. In this world, she's the only one who truly cares about me. In my past life, after I died, she was the only one who kept fighting for justice on my behalf. I replied with a smiley face. Come out for a drink? Let's celebrate your rebirth, she sent another message. I looked at myself in the mirror, there finally seemed to be a hint of color in that face. Yeah. It was time to celebrate. I met up with Quinn at a quiet bar. The moment she saw me, she gave me a big hug. You're so thin now, she said with concern, gently touching my face. Make sure to eat well from now on, okay? I nodded, feeling my eyes grow slightly warm. We talked a lot, about funny moments from our school days and about our lives over the past few years. I didn't mention the rebirth, I only said that Vincent's death had made me see things clearly. Good that you've figured it out, Quinn said, raising her glass. To our Nyen, leaving the past behind and gaining billions, cheers. I raised my glass too and clinked it with hers. Just then, a familiar figure walked through the bar's entrance. It was Dylan. He seemed just as surprised to see me here, pausing for a moment. Then, he started walking toward us. Nyen, he said with a nod as a greeting. Dylan. And this is? His gaze shifted to Quinn. My friend, Quinn, I introduced. Dylan extended his hand to Quinn. Dylan. Nyen's attorney. Quinn shook his hand cordially, though her eyes sparkled with a hint of playful curiosity. Dylan, care to join us for a drink? She enthusiastically invited. I looked at her in surprise. For the first time ever, Dylan didn't decline. Sure. He took the seat opposite me, and the entire atmosphere of the bar seemed to shift subtly with his presence, becoming somehow different. My younger brother-in-law wants to take over the company? I sent him straight to the police station. Dylan's arrival added a delicate tension to what had been a relaxed girls' night. He spoke little, simply sitting quietly, occasionally sipping his drink. Yet his presence was overwhelming, the elite aura radiating from his very bones made him impossible to ignore. Quinn was clearly intrigued by him, continuously steering the conversation. Dylan, you're such a young achiever. I've heard you're practically a legend in the industry. You flatter me, Quinn, Dylan replied, always impeccably diplomatic. So, Dylan, do you happen to have a girlfriend? Quinn finally cut to the chase. I nearly choked on my drink and quickly tried to signal her with my eyes. Dylan glanced at me, the corner of his mouth quirking faintly, so briefly it might have been imaginary. No, he answered. Then. Quinn. I finally couldn't help interrupting her. Are you conducting a census or something? Quinn stuck out her tongue at me and made a funny face. That night, we didn't discuss any more personal topics. Dylan and I briefly went over the next steps in the legal process. As for Kyle, the evidence was ironclad. He had illegally sold a limited edition sports car registered under Vincent's name, which already constituted the crime of embezzlement. The court summons would be delivered to him tomorrow. As for Vivian's parents, their defamatory remarks had caused extremely harmful effects online, and they too would face legal consequences. What about Cynthia? I asked. The information about the nursing home is already in your email, Dylan said. The environment and services are top-notch. Of course, the cost will be deducted from her bare minimum alimony. I nodded. This arrangement was perfect. Keeping her alive, trapped in the suffering of falling from luxury to frugality, was far more satisfying than letting her die. The next day, the melodramatic scene I had anticipated played out as expected. Kyle received the court summons and went completely berserk. He drove recklessly to the villa, honking like a madman and ramming the gate. I called the police without hesitation. When the police arrived, he was still throwing a tantrum, rolling on the ground and hurling obscenities at me. Trespassing, intentional property damage, and personal threats, I said from the second-floor balcony, looking down at him coolly as I addressed the officers beside me. These charges should be enough to put him away for a few days, right? The police glanced at the dented iron gate and then at Kyle, who was still rolling on the ground, before nodding in agreement. Eventually, Kyle was dragged into the police car by 2 officers, one on each side, like a lifeless dog. Cynthia rushed over upon hearing the news, and the moment she saw her son being arrested, she immediately tried to pull a dramatic scene, wailing, making a scene, and even threatening suicide. I had the bodyguards stop her at the gate. Then, right in front of her, I threw down the brochures Dylan had sent me for several top-tier retirement homes from the balcony. Pick one, I said. Otherwise, I'll choose for you. Cynthia stared at the brochures, then at the retreating police car, and finally realized I was dead serious. Every pillar of support she had relied on, her eldest son and her youngest, was now gone, one dead, the other arrested. She had completely lost her game. Finally collapsing, she slumped to the ground, wailing in despair. I watched coldly, then turned and closed the balcony door. With these domestic affairs resolved, I could now focus all my energy on the real battle ahead, the Grosvenor Group. On Monday, for the first time, I stepped into the headquarters of the Grosvenor Group as its largest shareholder. It was a towering skyscraper located in the heart of the city's CBD, grand and magnificent. Dressed in a sleek white suit and skirt with 10-centimeter heels, I walked into the chairman's office, the symbolic pinnacle of power, escorted by a group of the company's senior executives. The office was spacious, decorated in Vincent's preferred understated style. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the entire city. I walked behind the desk that once belonged to Vincent and sat down. It was comfortable. This position was far more comfortable than staying in that cold villa. Nyen. Chase, Vincent's former personal assistant and now mine, respectfully placed a file on my desk. This is the minutes from last week's company meeting and this week's schedule. I nodded and opened the file. There was an internal executive meeting at 2 in the afternoon. I knew this would be the real danger awaiting me. Vincent's death was sudden, and the company was now in disarray. Those old-timers who had fought alongside him to build the business, those ambitious people eyeing his position, everyone was waiting to see me, the parachuted chairman, make a fool of myself. They probably all thought I was just a lucky housewife who inherited a massive fortune, completely clueless about business. They wanted to render me powerless, to turn me into a mere puppet. Unfortunately for them, they miscalculated. In my past life, before marrying Vincent, I was also a top graduate from a prestigious university and had thrived in investment banking. Those business cases, those financial statements, they were once my closest companions. It was Vincent who personally clipped my wings. And now, I am going to let these wings grow back. 2 p.m., the conference room. I arrived right on time. The long meeting table was flanked by the company's core executives, all wearing solemn expressions, their eyes filled with varying degrees of scrutiny, overt or covert. Seated to my right was the company's vice president, Victor, an ambitious middle-aged man. In Vincent's time, he was second only to the CEO. Now, the way he looked at me was as if I were nothing more than a placeholder, easily replaceable at any moment. Nien, Victor wasted no time in launching his challenge as the meeting began. We all know you've just taken over the company and aren't yet familiar with the operations. For the sake of stable growth, I suggest that, during this transition period, the daily decision-making should remain a collective responsibility of the management committee. To put it bluntly, what he meant was to take away my authority. Several other executives from his faction immediately nodded in agreement. Indeed, Nien, you are still young after all. It's better to listen more to us old-timers. The company cannot go a day without leadership, but we can't have amateurs directing professionals either. Their coordinated responses instantly made the atmosphere tense. I didn't speak but listened quietly. Only after they had all finished did I slowly raise my head, my gaze sweeping across everyone present. And then, I smiled. Are you all done, uncles? My form of address caught everyone off guard. Since you're done, it's my turn now. I dropped the smile, and my eyes suddenly turned sharp. Vice President Victor, you say I don't understand the business. Well then, let's talk about business. I slid a document in front of me to the center of the conference table. This is the company's investment proposal for the Swan Harbor project from last quarter. It plans to invest $5 billion to create a high-end resort. This is the project you strongly advocated for, isn't it? Victor's expression changed slightly. Upon parachuting into the group headquarters, they called me the Black Widow who brings misfortune to husbands. The Swan Harbor project is Victor's recent proudest achievement. He collaborated with several real estate companies in the southern city, painting an incredibly enticing picture, claiming to create a top-tier resort destination that could rival the Maldives. When Vincent was alive, he was very optimistic about this project and had already prepared to inject the first round of funding. That's correct, Victor adjusted his glasses, regaining his composure. This project is the most important strategic layout for our company in the next 5 years. Whether from the perspective of market prospects or expected returns, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Is that so? I leaned back in my chair, lightly tapping my fingers on the desk. Whether it's an opportunity or a trap may not be so clear-cut. My words caused a slight stir in the conference room. Victor's face completely darkened. Nien, what do you mean by this? Are you questioning my professional competence or the judgment of the entire project team? I'm questioning no one. I only believe in data. I pressed the remote, and the screen behind me immediately displayed an analytical report I had spent all night preparing. This is the simulated climate change data for the next 10 years at the location of the Swan Harbor project. The data shows that due to global warming, sea levels in this area will rise by at least 30 centimeters within 5 years. This means that over half of the planned beach and offshore villa areas will be submerged. But that's not the deadliest part. I switched to the next page. This is a geological survey report I obtained from a friend inside the Ministry of Natural Resources. The report indicates that the Swan Harbor project site lies on the edge of a minor seismic zone. Although the risk is low, if a geological disaster were to occur, the implications for a top-tier resort marketed on safety and privacy should be clearer to everyone here than to me. The meeting room fell into complete silence. Everyone stared in shock at the cold, meticulous data displayed on the screen, details they had never seen in that thick, eloquently worded proposal. Sweat began to bead on Victor's forehead. Where did you get these numbers? Their authenticity is questionable. He was still making a last-ditch effort. Authenticity? I smiled. Vice President Victor, if you don't believe it, we can invite a third-party authoritative institution to conduct a fresh evaluation right now, on the spot. I'll personally cover the assessment fees. But if the results align with my report. I paused, my gaze turning icy. Then you, and your team, can pack up and leave. Because Grosvenor Group has no use for incompetents who can't even identify basic risks. My words landed like a hammer. Victor opened his mouth, but not a single word came out. He knew that if I dared to say this, it meant the data in my hands was irrefutably real. He had lost. Utterly and completely. Now, I stood up, bracing my hands on the table as I glared at everyone present, who still thinks I don't understand the business. Who still believes I'm just an amateur bossing around the professionals. Silence. The executives who had been echoing Victor moments ago now hung their heads, wishing they could vanish into the ground. The way they looked at me had changed, from initial disdain and scrutiny to awe and fear. They probably never imagined in their wildest dreams that this seemingly fragile young widow would wield such thunderous authority and possess such razor-sharp business acumen. Good, I said, settling back into my chair. Since no one has any objections, let's continue the meeting. First, the Swan Harbor project is to be halted immediately. Form a specialized team to reassess it. Victor, you're excluded from this team. Second, the finance department is to freeze all transactions related to the project. I want to see where every single penny was spent. Third, from today onward, all company projects involving investments exceeding 10 million require my personal signature before they can proceed. One by one, I issued my directives, no longer suggestions, but orders. This was me, Nyen, as the ultimate authority of Grosvenor Group, baring my fangs for the first time. After the meeting, I returned to my office alone. The glow of the setting sun seeped through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting its light upon me. As I gazed down at the bustling city beneath, not a hint of joy from victory stirred in my heart. I knew this was just the beginning. Today, I had provoked Victor and offended most of the company's senior executives. They wouldn't let this slide. The road ahead would only grow tougher. Lost in thought, I heard a knock, and my assistant, Chase, entered. His expression was complex. Nyen, people outside, they're all saying. Saying what? I asked. They're calling you. The husband-killing Black Widow, Chase said cautiously. Not only did you cause your husband's death, but now you're out to curse the company's old guard to their demise. I laughed when I heard it. Black Widow? I shook my head. That nickname isn't flattering. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the sinking sun on the horizon. Tell them, I said, I prefer another title. Queen. They set up a banquet with ulterior motives, and I overturned the table on the spot. The title Queen quickly spread within the company, though mostly laced with mockery and disdain. Victor's faction described me behind my back as a ruthless woman who rose to power by relying on her husband's inheritance. They spread all sorts of rumors, labeling me as jealous, harsh, and even knowledgeable in some dubious black magic. I ignored all of it. I knew that in the face of absolute power, any gossip would crumble. I began restructuring the bloated and stagnant company in my own way. I hired an external professional auditing team to conduct a thorough review of the company's financial records over the past 5 years. And sure enough, this investigation uncovered numerous issues. Falsified accounts, irregular procurement practices, dubious fund flows, a vast, tangled web of vested interests emerged before my eyes. And at the center of this web were the company's senior executives, led by Victor. They are like a group of parasites clinging to the Grosvenor Group tree, greedily draining its nutrients. I quietly locked the audit report in the safe. It wasn't the right time to play this card yet. A week later, Victor probably thought the storm had passed and started causing trouble again. Under the pretext of welcoming Nyen back, he organized a gathering at an exclusive private club, inviting all the company's top executives. When Chase handed me the invitation, his face showed a hint of worry. Nyen, this is clearly a banquet with ulterior motives. I know, I replied with a smile as I took the invitation. But even a trap has to be walked into. Otherwise, they'll think I'm afraid. That evening, I arrived as promised. The private room was already full. Victor sat at the head of the table, and upon seeing me enter, he immediately stood up with an exaggerated smile. Ah, Nyen. you finally arrived. Please, take a seat, take a seat. His enthusiasm made it seem as if there had never been any tension between us. I nodded and sat down next to him. After several rounds of drinks and dishes, Victor finally revealed his true colors. He lifted his glass, stood up, and said to me, "Nien, you've been with the company for a while now. We old-timers all think you're exceptionally capable and have remarkable drive. However, the company's grown, and operations have become complex. Relying on you alone is simply too much for one person to handle." So? I swirled the red wine in my glass, looking at him. "So, after some discussion, we'd like to recommend a few deputies for you." Victor clapped his hands as he spoke, and the private room's door swung open, admitting 3 people. One of them is Victor's nephew. The other 2 are also close confidants with deep ties to him. These 3 are all key business talents of the company. Their capabilities, as everyone can see, speak for themselves, Victor introduced proudly. "From now on, let them share some of your workload, Nien." How does that sound? This is hardly about sharing the workload. It's clearly an attempt to place his trusted allies in the company's key positions, further marginalizing me. All the executives present are watching me, waiting for my reaction. If I agree, it would mean yielding to their demands, and as the chairman, I'd become nothing more than a figurehead. If I refuse, I'd be disrespecting these senior figures, tearing face right here, making it impossible for me to operate smoothly in the company afterward. It's a lose-lose situation. I set down my wine glass and smiled. VP Victor's proposal is excellent. A victorious grin spread across Victor's face. The other senior members also visibly relaxed. But, I continued, shifting my tone, I think it's not enough. Everyone froze. For the company to grow, we need more talent. I stood up, walked to the private room's door, and opened it. Addressing those outside, I said, "Come in." A group of people entered through the door. At the forefront was Dylan. Behind him followed more than a dozen men and women dressed in professional attire, exuding strong, commanding presences. Every single one of them had been poached by me from headhunting firms at high salaries, elites at the very top of their respective fields. Among them were gold medal investors, top-tier project managers, the most formidable legal experts, and the most brilliant marketing directors. "Let me introduce everyone," I said, pointing to the person behind Dylan with a smile. "Starting tomorrow, they will officially join Grosvenor Group as heads of various core departments." As for the 3 key personnel recommended by Deputy Director Victor, I paused, shifting my gaze to Victor with an icy smile. I think they would be much better suited to spend some quality time in the company's grassroots positions. A good tempering experience, if you will. The private room fell into dead silence. Everyone was stunned by this move of mine. Victor's face flushed a deep crimson, almost purple. He probably never dreamed that not only would I refuse his arrangements, but I'd also directly eliminate all his men. "Nien. What do you think you're doing?" he roared in frantic fury. That means, I walked up to him, picked up the unopened bottle of Lafite on the table, and poured it over his greasy face. The red wine trickled down his hair, drenching his entire face, a pitiful yet comical sight. My company, my rules. I slammed the empty bottle heavily onto the table with a loud thud. As for you old farts, who occupy positions without delivering results, either leave on your own, or I'll personally kick each and every one of you out. With that, I didn't spare them another glance. Turning around, I strode out with my people in tow. I knew that from tonight onward, my war with them had officially and fully begun. With one statement, I sent all the company's parasites packing. The incident of flipping the table at the metaphorical Hong Men feast spread like wildfire throughout the company. Everyone now knew, the newly appointed female chairperson was no pushover. The old guard from Victor's faction was thoroughly provoked. They began to gang up against me within the company, deliberately creating obstacles. For the new projects I promoted, they feigned compliance but in reality delayed progress. The newcomers I promoted were subjected to endless harassment and exclusion. When I called meetings, they either collectively skipped them or openly opposed me during the sessions. The entire company was thrown into chaos because of them. They thought that by using these methods, they could force me to yield and compromise. They were too naive. This was exactly the day I had been waiting for. On Friday afternoon, I summoned an all-staff meeting under the pretext of announcing major company matters. Naturally, Victor and his gang looked down on it. They gathered in small groups in their offices, sipping tea, chatting, and waiting for me to become a laughingstock. At 3 p.m., the meeting began on schedule. Standing on the stage, I faced the sea of employees below. I know there have been many discordant voices within the company recently. I cut straight to the chase. Many people are discontent with me, the new chairman. And many are just waiting to see when Grosvenor Group will collapse. The auditorium was dead silent. Today, I stand here to tell you all three things. First, I clicked the remote, and on the large screen behind me appeared a document, the audit report I had previously locked away in the safe. This report meticulously records every single irregular financial transaction the company has made over the past 5 years. The total amount reaches 9 figures. The audience erupted in an instant uproar. Everyone involved in this report, my voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed through every corner of the room. I am giving you one final opportunity. Within the next hour, voluntarily go to Human Resources, submit your resignation, and repay all the embezzled funds. Do this, and I will let bygones be bygones. If you're still sitting here in an hour. I paused, my gaze turning icy cold. Then what awaits you won't be resignation letters, but court subpoenas. My words landed like a depth charge. Many in the audience immediately changed expressions. They began fidgeting uneasily, whispering to each other. Second matter. I continued, ignoring their reactions. Starting next Monday, the company will undergo a comprehensive organizational restructuring and compensation system reform. We will eliminate all redundant, inefficient departments. At the same time, all employees' salaries will be re-evaluated. The competent will rise, the mediocre will fall. Your paycheck will depend solely on your ability, not your seniority, not your background. We will implement an employee stock ownership plan. Every employee who creates value for the company will have the opportunity to become a shareholder and share in the company's growth dividends. This announcement proved even more explosive than the previous one. The employees' expression shifted from shock to excitement and anticipation. This means the company will no longer be a family-owned enterprise for a select few. It will belong to every individual who genuinely strives for its success. Finally, the third matter. I gazed at the audience, at those young, vibrant faces. I make this promise to all of you. Under my leadership, within 3 years, the market value of Grosvenor Group will double. And so will the income of every single one of you here today. As soon as I finished speaking, thunderous applause erupted from the audience, prolonged and unceasing. Meanwhile, in the offices of the old guard, Victor and his associates were watching everything unfold in the venue through internal surveillance. Their expressions could no longer be described as merely unpleasant. They were ashen. They knew they were finished. The 1 hour I had given them was both an ultimatum and a final act of courtesy. Either resign voluntarily, return the embezzled funds, and preserve their reputations, or face disgrace and imprisonment. They had no choice. In less than half an hour, a long queue formed outside the Human Resources Department. Those once arrogant parasites now stood like defeated roosters, heads hung low as they handed in their resignations. I stood by the office window, watching it all with a heart as calm as still water. Chase walked in and handed me a cup of hot tea. "Nien," he said, looking at me with a newfound respect in his eyes, "how did you do it?" I took the tea and sipped. "Simple," I replied. "To kill a snake, strike its head. To deal with wolves, you must be fiercer than them." Outside, dusk fell. The storm that had swept through the entire company had finally settled. I knew that from today onward, this company truly belonged to Nien. That gold medal lawyer had even started sticking to me like a shadow. The company's overhaul went more smoothly than I had imagined. The elite team I had poached with high salaries quickly filled the power vacuum, injecting this old enterprise with fresh vitality. Every day, I was as busy as a spinning top, attending meetings, reviewing reports, approving projects, barely having any time for myself. Yet this kind of busyness made me feel incredibly fulfilled. I could clearly sense that, little by little, I was gaining control over my own life and this vast business empire. My anorexia had unknowingly completely disappeared. My weight had returned to a healthy level. Quinn said my complexion was even better now than during my college years. The only slight annoyance was Dylan. Since the company got back on track, his appearances had become increasingly frequent. At first, he would come as the legal advisor to discuss some company contracts with me. Later, it turned into dropping by to have lunch together. Eventually, he even started staying in my office all afternoon under the pretext of discussing future development strategies. He would bring me pour-over coffee from his favorite cafe, casually mention the new film by that niche director I liked, and even hand me a cup of perfectly warm milk when I worked late into the night, exhausted. His intentions were so obvious that even Chase noticed. Nyen, Chase couldn't resist gossiping one day while delivering documents to me. Is Dylan pursuing you? I kept my eyes on the files and didn't look up. Focus on your work. Don't dwell on trivial matters. Still, my heart skipped a beat because of his words. I had to admit, Dylan was a very charming man. He was intelligent, composed, professional, and exuded a mature man's unique calmness and sex appeal. Being around him made me feel relaxed and safe. But I didn't dare. After surviving that hellish marriage with Vincent, I was instinctively fearful and resistant to relationships. I'm afraid, once again, of falling into that abyss of utter destruction. So I've been deliberately keeping my distance from him. Every step he takes forward, I take one back. He seems to have noticed my evasiveness. But he hasn't given up, nor has he pressured me. Like a patient hunter, unhurried and unperturbed, he quietly lays his intricate net around me. Until that day. It was my 27th birthday. I had almost forgotten about it myself. That evening, I was working late in the office alone. Close to 10 o'clock, Dylan arrived. He wasn't wearing his usual sharp suit. Instead, he had on a casual cashmere sweater and trousers, shedding some of his lawyerly edge for a more homely warmth. In his hands, he carried a cake box and a thermal food jar. "Happy birthday," he said, placing them on my desk with a hint of laughter in his voice. I was stunned. "How did you know?" "I memorized your profile the first day I joined," he replied. Something inside me trembled faintly, as if gently bumped. He opened the insulated container, revealing a steaming bowl of longevity noodles. On top lay a perfectly fried sunny-side-up egg. "Try it," he said, "I made it myself." I looked at him, the eloquent courtroom debater, the decisive businessman, now resembling an eager boy awaiting praise, his eyes flickering with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. My heart was utterly in disarray. I picked up the chopsticks and took a bite of the noodles. Surprisingly, the taste was uncommonly good. "Do you like it?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled. That smile, like winter sunlight, instantly melted away all the ice in my heart. After finishing the noodles, he lit the candles on the cake. "Make a wish," he said. I watched the flickering candlelight for a moment, then closed my eyes. What did I wish for? I couldn't even remember myself. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes again, Dylan was gazing intently at me. His eyes reflected the candlelight, and my own reflection. At that moment, all my defenses, all my fears, crumbled into dust. "Nyen," he suddenly spoke, calling my name. It was the first time he had ever called me that. "Can I pursue you?" he asked, straightforward and sincere. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at him and didn't answer immediately. I knew that if I nodded, it would mean I had to summon the courage once more to trust someone, to believe in a relationship. This was a high-stakes gamble. The wager was my heart, this fragmented, scarred heart I had painstakingly pieced back together. Could I afford to take that bet? My mother-in-law knelt and begged me, but all I wanted was to send her to a nursing home. Just as the relationship between me and Dylan had reached a delicate impasse, an uninvited guest shattered the fragile peace. Cynthia. Somehow, she had gotten hold of my company's address and stormed to the reception downstairs, demanding to see me by name. Chase came in to report, looking troubled. "Nyen, what do you think?" "Let her come up," I said. I was eager to see what had become of the once overbearing old lady. A few minutes later, Cynthia was escorted into my office. She looked nothing like her former self from just a few months ago. Once, she was adorned with jewels and exquisite makeup. Now, she wore a faded old outfit, her hair graying, her face lined with wrinkles, her eyes brimming with unconcealable exhaustion and the weight of time. The adage "from prosperity to poverty is hard" was vividly embodied in her. Nyen. As soon as she saw me, she hurried over, forcing a smile even more pitiful than tears. I remained silent, quietly observing her. Nyen. Nyen, stung by my indifference, she grew awkward, wringing her hands as she pleaded, "Look, no matter what, we were once mother and daughter-in-law. Just show some mercy, let Kyle off. He's still young, his life shouldn't be ruined like this." Kyle was sentenced to 3 years for embezzlement and assault. He injured a security guard while ramming through a gate, with the charges compounded. "He's young?" I laughed. "He's only a year younger than me. I'm 26, already the chairman of a listed company. He's 25, still rotting in jail." "Cynthia, whose fault do you think that is?" Cynthia's face turned ashen, then pale. "It's me. It's my fault. I failed to teach him properly." Suddenly, with a thud, she knelt before me. Even I was stunned. I never expected her to go this far. "Nyen, I beg you." She clung to my legs, tears streaming down her aged face. "As long as you agree to drop the lawsuit and get Kyle out, I'll do anything for you. I'll even cat out to you." As she spoke, she truly lowered her head and knocked it against the ground. Thud. 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 The sound was heavy and sharp. I looked at her, feeling no joy, no sympathy in my heart. All I felt was profound sorrow. If only she had shown me the slightest respect or kindness back then, why did it have to come to this? If she had properly disciplined her son back then, hadn't been so indulgent, hadn't shielded him so much. How could things have come to this point? "Get up," I said calmly. "Don't put on a show here, it won't work." "I won't," she wailed. "If you don't agree, I'll kneel here until I die." "Oh?" I took out my phone and dialed the front desk. "Send 2 security guards up. Escort this lady out. From now on, she's not allowed to set foot in this building ever again." After hanging up, I looked at Cynthia, whose face had turned ashen, and delivered my final words. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. Your son has been behaving exceptionally well in prison. Just 2 days ago, he got an additional 3-month sentence for fighting with an inmate." With that, I ignored her howling and walked straight out of the office. At the door, Dylan was leaning against the wall, as if he had been waiting for me for a long time. "Everything settled?" he asked. "Yes. Are you feeling down?" I shook my head. He looked at me and suddenly reached out, ruffling my hair. "You did great," he said. His palm was so warm. At that moment, the last ripple of unease stirred by Cynthia in my heart finally settled. Right. Why should I let irrelevant people affect my mood? My life has already restarted. I should move forward. "Dylan," I lifted my head and looked at him, "does the question you asked me last time still stand?" He froze for a moment, then a brilliant light burst forth in his eyes. "Count on it," he said. "It will always count." "Then my answer is," I looked at him and spoke word by word, "you can, give it a try." He smiled. This time, it wasn't the polite, restrained smile. Instead, it was a heartfelt, radiant smile, like a child who had been given all the candies in the world. He stepped forward and, tightly, pulled me into his embrace. "I won't let you down," he whispered solemnly into my ear. I rested my head against his sturdy chest, listening to his steady and strong heartbeat. I thought, this time, I must have gambled right. I used the scumbag's money to start an anti-infidelity foundation. My relationship with Dylan began in a low-key yet sweet manner. Unlike other couples, he didn't send me flowers or take me to see movies. Our dates usually took place in my office. He would bring homemade bento boxes to have lunch with me. Then, under the afternoon sun, we'd each sip a cup of coffee while discussing the company's next merger. He would review all the legal documents for me, stay late to work alongside me, and massage my shoulders when I was tired. His love was woven into every little detail of our work. This comrade-in-arms style of romance made me feel incredibly secure and at ease. Through our joint efforts, the company progressed by leaps and bounds. We successfully acquired 2 highly promising tech firms and made groundbreaking strides in the renewable energy sector. Grosvenor Group's stock price soared. My name, Nyen, became a legend in the business world, one not to be underestimated. As my career stabilized, I also began to ponder how to handle the massive, blood-stained inheritance Vincent had left behind. Should I just spend it? I couldn't get past the moral dilemma. Donate it? That felt too generous toward unrelated people. Until one day, I received a private message from a stranger, a woman who shared her story with me. She was also a woman betrayed by her husband. Her husband spent all his money on his mistress, completely neglecting her and their child. She wanted a divorce but had no money for a lawyer, nor the courage to face the future alone. She said she envied me, my decisiveness, my courage. She said, if only there were a place in this world that could help women like me. Her words struck me like a bolt of lightning. Yes. Why not? I was once one of them too. I understand best that kind of helplessness and despair of being stuck in the mire. Now that I have the ability, why can't I lend them a helping hand? I shared this idea with Dylan. I want to establish a foundation, I said, specifically to provide free legal assistance and psychological counseling for women who have been hurt and betrayed in marriage. To help them escape their difficulties and start a new life. Dylan listened in silence for a long time. Then, he looked at me with unprecedented gentleness and pride in his eyes. That's the best investment plan I've ever heard, he said. What do you need me to do? I need you, I took his hand, to be the first, and permanent, legal advisor for this foundation. He smiled. It would be my honor. I named this foundation Yen, which sounds like my name, but its meaning is belief. I hope it can bring a glimmer of light and the belief to live to all women struggling in the darkness. In Vincent's name, I injected the first sum of funding into the foundation, a staggering 9-figure amount. In this way, I completed the final purification of this blood money. On the day the foundation was established, we held a small press conference. Many media outlets had arrived. Standing on the stage, looking at the flashing cameras below, my heart was utterly calm. I established this foundation not for fame or profit, I said. I only want to use my own experience to tell all women 3 things. First, marriage is not the entirety of your life. Men are even less the whole world to you. Second, never abandon personal growth. Your abilities are your greatest source of confidence. Third, and most importantly, when you face betrayal and hurt, don't cry, don't make a scene. Stay calm, stay rational. Take up the weapon of the law to reclaim everything that rightfully belongs to you. Then, turn around and begin your own beautiful life. My words spread across the internet through the live broadcast. That day, my foundation received countless pleas for help and innumerable small donations. I knew I had done the right thing. After curing my anorexia and incidentally acquiring my rival company, with the Nyen Foundation now on track, I felt my life had finally found a brand new, more meaningful fulcrum. I was no longer just a businessperson, an avenger. I had become someone who could bring hope to others. This sense of achievement brought me more joy than earning any amount of money. My physical health also improved steadily. Thanks to the joint efforts of Quinn and the nutritionist, I completely overcame my former morbid thinness, becoming healthy and radiant. I started working out and practicing yoga. I even signed up for an oil painting class. I wanted to reclaim, bit by bit, all those years stolen from me by Vincent in my past life. Meanwhile, my career also reached new heights. After I completely cleaned up the mess left behind by Victor and his associates, the Grosvenor Group, like a giant ship unburdened of all its weight, began advancing at full speed. Our next target is Fenghua Capital, the once proud business empire of Theo, Vivian's ex-boyfriend and mentor, who never directly appeared in my storyline but can be associated through Fenghua Capital. Though Theo has already been disgraced, Fenghua Capital remains a formidable competitor in the industry. Especially after I acquired one of their subsidiaries, they viewed the Grosvenor Group as a thorn in their side, opposing us at every turn. Since they're so eager to pick a fight, I said coldly during a board meeting, glancing at the latest competitive analysis report, we might as well swallow them whole. My proposal made everyone gasp in shock. Fenghua Capital was a massive entity with deep-rooted foundations. Trying to swallow it whole was like a snake attempting to devour an elephant. Nien, isn't this too risky? A newly appointed executive said with concern. Risk and reward are always directly proportional, I replied, standing up and walking toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling window. Grosvenor Group needs a tough battle to prove its strength. And I need a stepping stone of sufficient weight to elevate me even higher. My ambition was laid bare for all to see. But this time, no one questioned me. They looked at me with nothing but conviction and a desire to follow. The campaign to acquire Fenghua officially began. This was a war without smoke or gunfire. The battle of capital, the manipulation of public opinion, the negotiations of commerce, every stage was fraught with traps and dangers. Dylan, our team, and I practically lived in the office. We worked together like two perfectly synchronized fighter jets, standing shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield of capital. He was responsible for clearing all legal hurdles and constructing the most secure firewall, while I oversaw the overarching strategy and the most critical negotiations. During that period, I met with nearly every single one of Fenghua Capital's shareholders, one by one. I laid out the pros and cons for them, painted a grander vision, and offered them benefits that were impossible to refuse. Finally, after 3 months of effort, at the shareholders' meeting of Fenghua Capital, I, Nien, with an absolute majority stake, successfully took control of the company. The news sent shockwaves throughout the business world. No one could have imagined that Nien, who was virtually unknown a year ago, could rise so quickly to become a business queen capable of shaking up the entire industry. On the day the acquisition was finalized, Dylan and I stood at the base of Fenghua Capital's building, gazing up at the huge sign that was about to be replaced. We won, I said. You won, he replied, looking at me with immense pride in his eyes. I smiled, suddenly feeling hungry. I want spicy hot pot, I said. He paused for a moment before laughing. All right, he agreed, extra spicy. Instead of celebrating at some high-end restaurant, we went to a tiny, somewhat cramped street-side hot pot stall. I ordered a large bowl, adding all my favorite ingredients. I ate heartily and felt completely satisfied. Just like that day a year ago when I was reborn, except back then, it was to celebrate a new life. This time, it was to celebrate truly taking control of my own destiny. The secret ledger left by the scumbag exposed an even greater conspiracy. Swallowing up Fenghua Capital instantly multiplied the scale of the Grosvenor Group several times over. With it came more complex integration and even more challenging management. Just as I was busy handling these matters, an unexpected discovery threw all my plans into disarray. While taking over Fenghua Capital's finances, our team uncovered an extremely well-hidden offshore trust account. The transactions in this account were highly unusual. It was intricately connected to both the Grosvenor Group and Fenghua Capital, yet every transaction had been meticulously disguised and layered, making it look like a massive money laundering network. And the actual controller of this account, after tracking by our technical team, ultimately pointed to someone I never expected, Vincent. As I looked at the investigation report, my blood nearly froze. Vincent had been secretly using Fenghua capital to embezzle from Grosvenor Group behind everyone's back. The Swan Harbor project was never an investment trap at all. It was a smokescreen, one that allowed him to legitimately transfer $5 billion from Grosvenor Group into that overseas account. If I hadn't been reborn, if I hadn't stopped that project, Grosvenor Group would likely be an empty shell by now, completely drained. And he, Vincent, would have taken that fortune abroad with his beloved Vivian, living it up in luxury. Meanwhile, I and his pitiful family would be left drowning in massive debt, doomed to ruin. How cruel. Truly, utterly cruel. I always thought he just didn't love me, that he was merely selfish. I never imagined that, from the very beginning, he had been scheming against me and the entire Grosvenor Group. There's more, Dylan said, his expression graver than ever, as he slid another document toward me. We've discovered that this overseas account has financial transactions with several international illegal gambling syndicates. Moreover, just one day before Vincent's car accident, a staggering $1 billion was transferred out of this account. My heart sank suddenly. What does this imply? It implies that Vincent may not have just been laundering money. Dylan looked at me and pronounced each word deliberately. He was very likely involved in illegal, cross-border gambling. And he lost. Lost a lot. His accident. A terrifying conjecture suddenly formed in my mind. Could it not have been an accident? Dylan didn't respond. But his silence spoke volumes. A gambler who had lost everything. A ruthless, international crime syndicate. Vincent's death was never an accident. It was a premeditated murder. They staged an accident to make him and his lover vanish together. Then, that enormous inheritance became theirs for the taking. Me, the legitimate heir, was their next target from the very beginning. A bone-chilling cold surged from my tailbone up to the crown of my head. I had always believed my enemies were the Grosvenor Group, Victor, those visible adversaries clearly on the table. I never imagined that lurking in the shadows were even more terrifying, more lethal, jackals. They had been watching me all along. Waiting for the moment I let my guard down to deliver a fatal blow. Why haven't they made their move yet? I forced myself to stay calm. Because they didn't expect you to take control of the Grosvenor Group so quickly. Nor did they anticipate you swallowing Fenghua, Dylan said. Your growth has surpassed their expectations. They're waiting for a better opportunity. Or, I added, looking at him, they're searching for my weakness. And now, what was my greatest weakness? Myself. If I died, the Grosvenor Group, this colossal prize, would once again be left without an owner. They could swoop in and seize it. I finally understood why Dylan had always stayed by my side back then. He wasn't just pursuing me. He was protecting me. Standing atop the mountain, I raised a toast to my past life, then set out to embrace my future. After uncovering this shocking secret, I didn't feel a trace of fear. Instead, an unprecedented blaze of fighting spirit ignited within me. Want to kill me? Try to take what's mine. Fine. Let's see whose blade is quicker, or whose life is tougher. Dylan and I began a secret plan. On the surface, we pretended to know nothing about that overseas account, continuing to handle daily company affairs. Behind the scenes, we reached out to Interpol through various channels and handed over all the evidence we had gathered. It was a race against death itself. We had no idea when, where, or how the hidden assassins would strike us. For Quinn and everyone I cared about, I arranged top-tier security. I also began learning martial arts and shooting. I no longer wanted to leave my fate in others' hands. If danger truly approached, I hoped I would have the ability to fight back. During that time, Dylan and I were practically inseparable. We went to work together and left together. He moved into my villa, claiming it was for round-the-clock, close protection. Amidst that tense atmosphere filled with danger and uncertainty, our feelings for each other defied logic and escalated at an eerie, frenzied pace. We became each other's most trusted and reliable support. A month later, the moment to close the net finally arrived. On what seemed like an ordinary night, I deliberately drove alone to a remote, abandoned factory we had long prepared as a trap. This was a deliberate flaw I had sold to them. Sure enough, they took the bait. Several black commercial vehicles appeared like ghosts behind my car, surrounding me completely. Over a dozen tall men dressed in black stepped out, each with fierce eyes and weapons in hand. Sitting in my car, I watched them approach step by step. My heart was racing, but my hands were steady. From the passenger seat, I picked up the pistol I had practiced with countless times. At the very moment they were about to pull open my car door, piercing police sirens erupted from all directions of the factory. Countless searchlights instantly lit up, turning the entire area as bright as day. Freeze! You're surrounded. The assassins clearly didn't expect this to be a trap. Panicked and attempting to resist, they were swiftly subdued by the SWAT teams that had them completely encircled. A crisis massive enough to overturn the entire business world was thus quietly and thoroughly resolved by us, in this almost soundless manner. The next day, news reports broadcast the story: a multinational criminal syndicate involving billions in funds had been successfully dismantled. No one knew what connection I, the queen of the business world, had to the collapse of this syndicate. Everything was over. A week later, I graced the cover of Forbes magazine. In the photo, I stood on the rooftop of Grosvenor Group headquarters, wearing a long red dress with the city's glittering nightscape as my backdrop. My face wore a confident, yet serene smile. The magazine's caption read, "A legendary woman who transforms business into art." Holding that magazine, Dylan and I visited a cemetery. Not Vincent's, but an empty tomb I had erected for myself. The gravestone bore no name, just a single date. The day I had died in my previous life. I placed the magazine and a bouquet of white daisies before the tombstone. Then, I uncorked a bottle of fine red wine. I poured 2 glasses, one placed before the stone, the other raised to my lips and drained in one go. "To you," I whispered to the cold marble. "Thank you for your foolishness, your weakness, your death, for they birthed my rebirth." With these words, I took Dylan's hand, turned around, and left this place. The sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, casting its glow upon us. Warm and bright. I knew that from this moment on, the woman of my past life, named Nguyen, had truly died. And I, too, had truly begun my life. This life, with love, friends, a career. With infinite possibilities. How wonderful.